So this is my favorite chapter by far. This is the thing I love about politics. I love to study why people vote the way that they vote. I think it's like super interesting to look at demographics and where you live in the world and how candidates change depending on where they are, because they have figured out how to appeal to specific voters in specific areas. How it even comes down to the smallest things like how they dress. When President Barack Obama is going to a Rock the Vote event for college students, he's going to wear jeans and a button down. If he's going to an event for, AARP or something like that, where you're looking at an older population, he's going to wear a suit and tie. They figured this out. They know what you need. They know what you like to hear. They know where they are in the world or in the country, and they appeal to that. To me, I just think that's fascinating to sort of study. So we're going to talk a little bit about public opinion and political socialization. So first we need to define what public opinion is. And a lot of this is going to be review because you did the chapter 6 review, or hopefully you're in the middle of that right now. That's due tomorrow, by the way.
Huh?
The chapter 6 review, you already did it. I already graded it for you.
Me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool.
So public opinion is expressed and conveyed through polls, to public officials through polls. So basically it's, what does the public feel, think, want, talking about? It's usually reported through media, and sometimes public opinion is expressed through mass demonstrations, rallies, protests. The way that that public opinion is displayed is a spectrum, and it really is it goes from one side of a private poll that calls you on your phone to a massive rally, and anywhere in between. It can be a letter to the editor, it can be a news story, it can be an interview, it can be all sorts of different things that help understand what public opinion is. Consensus, just a term that you should know. A consensus is sort of a general agreement among the citizenry. So a consensus is sort of what the majority believes. A consensus, I'll give you an example. The consensus of the Paris attacks is that we should all, it's kind of a wake-up call. The consensus of our citizenry, so we can all agree that the Paris attacks is a pretty big wake-up call to the fact that terrorism isn't just in Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan. It's in the nightclubs, it's on the streets, it's in the movie theaters, it's all over now. And how do you combat that? And that's a big concern. So that's sort of the consensus. It's a commonly agreed upon idea. A divisive opinion is public opinion that's polarized between two quite different positions. For your homework tonight, there's a discussion question on Canvas. I found this little snippet in the week this week that says that we've gone from a 15% independent voter population to about a 5% independent voter. That actually right now most people have already decided which party they'll be voting for in 2017 or 16. It means that we have a very divisive opinion. Divisive opinion is a big deal right now. And it's because of a lot of things in our culture that allow you to only listen to the things that you want to listen to. You can turn on the TV and get your news from Fox News, MSNBC, Comedy Central, things like that, and you can hear what you want to hear. You don't have to hear what other people think. And that causes a divisive opinion. That wasn't how it was 40 years ago. It's a brand new thing. And then the last piece is a non-opinion. This is the lack of an opinion on an issue, just in general. We have a couple of these in our culture. Things like, well, I shouldn't even say that anymore, but there are just things that people just sort of like collectively don't have an opinion about. That there are just some things that we just sometimes don't know much about. A lot of these things are things that aren't super well known, like agriculture prices. I guess you could say in my culture, in my political socialization, it's pretty not opinion piece for me. I don't know much about it. I don't have a very strong opinion about what agricultural prices should be right now. Now, if I was in a community where agricultural work was a big deal, obviously that would be a pretty big deal. So you have to kind of understand that public opinion varies in a lot of areas with a lot of issues, and it's studied. There are all sorts of things, things like the things that are suggested to you on websites, like I don't know, you guys aren't Facebook people anymore, are you? So like on my Facebook, it is suggesting things to me on the side of things I want to read. That's all based on public, they're monitoring the things that I Google search. They're monitoring the things that I am looking at, and they're suggesting things to me. All of that is archived. All of that is used to sort of base off of policy making. This is a graph that's in your book. Hopefully you saw it a little bit. It kind of shows the consensus and the divisive and the non-opinion in a graphic sense. So the consensus, which is the graph on the left, shows that the majority, 72%, feel like this is a pretty important thing, having a degree beyond high school. It's a consensus opinion. We all agree that having a high school diploma, well, we don't all agree, but most of us agree that it is pretty important to have. The divisive opinion is where you really see a half and half sort of idea. Do you think that the part of the U.S. Constitution providing Americans with equal protection under the law does not give gays and lesbians the right to legally marry? In 2014, this was really 50-50. We have started to see it go a little bit more towards the direction of approving it, but for a long time, it has been a very divisive opinion. Things like climate change for a long time were 50-50. Again, those things, they ebb and flow a little bit, but in general, there are some issues that are pretty in the middle. I would say things like immigration and stuff like that. And then non-opinion. As you may know, automatic cuts to the federal budget, known as sequestration, went into effect on March 1st. All in all, do you think that this is a good thing or a bad thing for the country? Do you know enough to say? Well, when the majority of the pie graph says I don't know enough to say, it's non-opinion. I don't have a very strong opinion about the federal budget because I don't get the federal budget. It's things that you're not super well educated in. Okay, models of political socialization. So, political socialization is the process by which people acquire political beliefs and attitudes. It is the process by which people acquire political beliefs and attitudes. It's not something that you consciously do. If I asked you to write down how you have been politically socialized, you're going to have a really hard time writing it down. Because there usually isn't a very clear evolution, it just sort of happens, okay? So a couple of things. I could tell you a little bit about my political socialization. Growing up, my mom is a teacher, my dad is a police officer. I believe in government. I believe that government can provide good things for people. That's because I grew up in a family that believes that. My brother has a disability. I believe that the government should help him out. Those are all my political socialization pieces. It's the family that I grew up in, it's the household that I grew up in, it's the things that I saw. My mom reads the paper every Saturday. My dad goes to board meetings. My brother doesn't know how to balance a checkbook, and so he needs to be on welfare. All of those things are experiences that make me believe what I believe in my political socialization. Kyle, my significant other, didn't grow up in that. His mom is a stay-at-home mom. His dad is a lawyer, a private lawyer. He doesn't see government as a huge deal. He doesn't like the idea of big government. He doesn't like the idea of welfare because all of his brothers and sisters are well-educated and on their own and can make their own money. It changes our political socialization. That's awesome. Having a good understanding of why you believe what you believe is important. Models of political socialization. Scholars have long believed that the most important early sources of political socialization are found in your family and your school. That's where you're going to get most of your political socialization right away, your family and your school. The exposure of younger Americans to many sources of ideas may also help you develop more progressive ideas on issues such as immigration and gay rights. If you've never met somebody who's gay, you might not have the same ideas as somebody who has spent most of their childhood with somebody or has a good friend who is homosexual. All of those things that you encounter, they change how you think about government. Okay, so let's talk about these subculture or sub-points that they have on this slide. Education is a source of political socialization. Please, please, please remember this one piece. This is super important. We know, studies show, that if children are exposed to political ideas at school and in the media, they will share these ideas with their parents, therefore continuing political socialization with their parents. If you go home and start talking about what's happening in the AAP government, you're keeping that political socialization moving, and that's what we need. We have too many people who know what they know, believe what they believe, and they never change, and they never talk about it, and they never question themselves. So we know that. The second thing about education that I need you to remember is the more formal education a person receives, the more likely it is that he or she will be interested in politics. We know that. The more degrees that you have, the more interested you are in politics, okay? It's the most important piece. You're more confident in your ability to understand political issues, and you're a more active participant in the political process. Now, we also, and we'll get to this in just a little while, we know the tendency of voters. The more education you have, do you lean more Democratic, do you lean more Republican? But that aside, we know that the more education you have, the more interested you will become in politics. Okay, peers and peer group influences. This is you guys. High school, a little bit into college, peers and peer groups are the highest influence of your political socialization. These are groups consisting of members that share common social characteristics. They play an important part of your socialization process by helping to shape attitudes and beliefs. You are friends with the people that you're friends with because they share a lot of the same ideas. And even if they differ from you, they express it in usually the same way that you express it. And so we find that especially young adults tend to group together in their peer groups. That you tend to make friends with the people who agree on some of those key issues. Now, that's not always true. I currently am in a relationship with someone who totally differs from me. But it doesn't mean that, like, when I was in college, I had a lot of the same friends who believed in a lot of the same things that I believed in. Opinion leaders influence. This is really interesting. These are people who are able to influence the opinions of others because of their position, expertise, or personality. You can have formal opinion leaders like presidents, congresspeople, lobbyists, media figures, religious leaders, famous celebrities. They do influence politics a lot. I think you're.
AIDS.
What's that?
Charlie Sheen has AIDS.
He's HIV.
AIDS.
It's different.
Oh, it's AIDS.
He's HIV positive. I read the article.
That's what I guess.
No, he's HIV positive.
No, that's what he said. He's like, I have AIDS.
Well, he's wrong because he's HIV positive. Somebody should tell him when he really has. No, but like I think your book uses Hillary Clinton as an example here. Hillary Clinton, before she started running for office, she went around and did a lot of speeches about women and the power of women in politics and around the world. She's influencing things. People like, yeah, thank you, Malala Yousafzai. She goes around and talks about the education for girls. The fact that she has this strong pop culture following means that she does have an influence. And then the last thing is political change and political socialization. This is the idea that new regimes help people establish important political dispositions. It's the belief that your engagement will yield results. There's a reason why there is all of this buzz every time we have a political or a presidential election. This idea that there's going to be a new breath into government when a new candidate comes in is an idea that we all tend to believe. Does it really happen? Not really. To be honest with you, our government is so entrenched in what they believe that there isn't a great deal of change that happens when a new candidate walks into the office of the presidency or when there's a midterm election. But we believe that that can happen. We believe that there's a new day, that this is a new turning point. It's like the Paul Ryan thing. You know, his whole speech when he became Speaker of the House is, I'm gonna change it. I'm gonna make Congress work better for the people. In reality, he's fighting a battle he probably won't be able to win. But we want to believe that he's going to do that for us. We want to believe that someone can do that, that they can make Congress more functional. Okay, impact of the media. Oh, I could just talk for hours on this. Please understand that the news that you receive is geared to make you believe specific things. Here's one prime example. So, the Paris attacks. We have all this news about the Paris attacks. Everyone on my Facebook feed is changing their profile picture to have this like France flag on it. Everyone, oh, peace for Paris. The day before, there's a huge bombing in Beirut, Lebanon. Nobody's changing their profile picture. Nobody's saying peace for Beirut. Nobody's going in and showing us real live video of all of the death and destruction that happened in Lebanon. The media, it pushes that. You have to understand that we think Paris is such a big deal because the media tells us that that's what we should believe. Every time I turn on the news in the last few days, all I've heard about is Paris. I haven't heard about Lebanon. The media is doing that. Does that make sense? You have to understand that it's not a bad thing, but the media isn't the end-all be-all of the news that you need to know. It isn't the end-all be-all of the issues that are happening. It's like when we were talking in this whole Black Lives Matter. Absolutely, this is a really cool opportunity for our culture to become better at racial relations. However, the media always focuses on law enforcement abusing their role in a white against an African American or an African American against a white, whatever you want to talk about. The reality of it is that we have so many other racial relation issues, but the media only focuses on law enforcement, and that's the only thing that we talk about on a day-to-day basis. You have to understand that the media has so much power. They have absolutely so much power in what you believe. And you don't even know it because you don't even know that there are other stories out there that you're not getting. So, agenda setting. This is determining which public policy questions will be debated or considered. If the media brings up a story every single day about the Paris attacks, we call for change. We want more issues. This idea of all of these Congress people saying they don't want Syrian refugees, they're agenda setting. They're finding a piece of this story and they're hammering it at you every single day. And they're trying to make it seem like big, big news. And it is big news, but there are a lot of other things that we have to deal with other than the Syrian refugee issue. Managed news is information generated and distributed by the government in such a way as to give government interest priority over candor. Managed news is what the White House is going to publish. If you go on the White House page for your news, cool, that's awesome, except for the fact that they're always going to tell you that the White House is doing awesome stuff. The White House doesn't publish things when they screw up. Congress, congressional people, their websites are always going to tell you the good things. They're not going to tell you if they're in a lawsuit. They're not going to tell you if they screwed something up. So the impact of the media is huge. It is really, really important. The presidential candidate, the candidates that you hear about, the candidates that you talk about in your everyday life are because the media does that to you. How many of you know anything about Martin O'Malley and what his issues are? Well, okay, thanks, Brian. But how many of you know about the Benghazi suit with Hillary? It's like because the media pushes those things, those are the things you know about. Sometimes that's not always a great idea. Okay, anyway, I'm gonna get off my soapbox.
Yes, you do.
Oh, and please don't change your profile picture. Like, changing your profile picture doesn't do anything to the world. It's not like, I just don't understand. Like, people are like, oh, I care, so I changed my profile picture. It's like, okay, cool, but.
Okay.
Yeah, anyway, okay, moving on. Just because I know that there are some people who I am friends with on Facebook who changed their profile picture and know nothing about this issue. Know nothing about it. They're just like, oh,
Can we talk?
I just changed my thing. Yes.
Somebody explain. Explain what?
What?
What actually happened? Like,
Oh.
I heard a lot of different stuff.
with the Paris attack?
I don't think we really know if we're 100% sure yet. There's just a lot of we know ISIS is out there.
Was it
so it's
7 or
easy to
8?
just-
Well, so we know that ISIS has claimed responsibility for the attacks in
But they
Paris.
claim responsibility for a lot of stuff that actually wasn't them.
Well,
Just want to scare people.
yeah, this is true. I believe that ISIS did this. I believe that that's probably a fair assumption. You know, like, I think that it was organized enough that it seems as though there had to be some sort of organization behind it,
Well,
right?
it
It's
was
not
a
just
sellout.
some guy who gets out his gun in a movie theater and then ISIS is like, yeah, they did it in the name of ISIS. You're right, there are some things like that. I think this is too well planned. The reality of it is that ISIS for a long time has been threatening soft targets. Essentially, what they plan to do is start targeting you in your everyday life. So it's not on the battlefields, it's not in these, camps. It's on the streets, it's in the grocery stores, it's in the movie theaters, it's in the nightclubs. And this is ISIS's kind of step out and saying, this is it. We're here, we've got it, we figured it out, we're gonna do this. And so it's one of those things where essentially we have been told this for a very long time. We knew that this was coming. This isn't like something where it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe. Intelligence agencies have known about this for years. They know that this is ISIS's goal. This is what ISIS wants. They want to get into your everyday life. And so this idea of the Paris attacks, it's like, oh, we didn't ever know that this would, no, we knew it would happen. The United States has been trying to monitor it for years. The problem is that how do you monitor it? It's impossible. That's why ISIS is so good at it, because they've picked an issue or a way to infiltrate that, we can't monitor everybody. We can't keep track of every single person. And what they do is, even if they're on a watch list, they wait. Like one of the people who did this attack was actually on a watch list in France for years. Well, there's nothing we can do. There's no way that, So anyway.
You know what's funny is they stepped up their airstrikes now instead of targeting little supply camps. Now they're actually shooting them down. 'Cause
Killing
now
them.
they shot at us. Now we can it's like if they shot a missile and killed a bunch of civilians. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Now they don't care because people don't care because they.
Right?
How can you tell who
You can't
ISIS is,
defeat
though?
an
And here's the other thing, Brady,
with
there are
airstrikes.
no-
It's not possible.
and there are
You
no
don't win a war
news
with
organizations talking about those civilians. Right? The media, there you go.
I know. And if we had before Paris, if we had hit a bunch of civilians, the media would have blown up and said, "Oh my God,
Exactly.
the government did this."
Exactly.
And now that the people want revenge,
Right.
now we don't care.
And we don't have to see it.
Yep.
We don't see what it looks like when 10 civilians get killed so that one ISIS leader is also killed. We don't ever see those images on TV every day. Anyway, okay. The influence of political events, life cycle effect. You've been talking about this in your chapter 6 review. We know this. The older you get, your political views will change. I was pretty convinced that this wouldn't happen to me, and it's already happening to me. It's making me very sad. It's just this idea that you have different issues, right? Like when I was 18, I don't even know what I wanted. I didn't even know what I wanted. But now I'm older and I'm $30,000 in debt. I want somebody to figure that out for me. And when I was 18, I could have cared less. What's that?
You wanted a new car.
I didn't really want a new car.
What did you have? What was your first car?
A Dodge Neon station.
Oh my God.
Oh, yeah.
Bring some nuts.
I was riding pretty
I
cool.
have one of those.
The problem is that no one could drive my car because no one can drive a stick shift.
Except now I sold it. Oh, it was a stick shift too? Was it the SRT4 or was it the SXT?
It was
Did it have a
purple.
turbo in
It was
it?
purple. It was purple. That's all I got. It had 4 doors.
That's okay.
Crank windows. Okay, generational effect. This is a long-lasting effect of the events of a particular time on political opinions of those who came of political age at the time. So when you come of political age, that sort of becomes your generation. You're called millennials, which I absolutely hate, but your generation has tendencies. Your generation, first of all, your generation is growing up in a culture where being out, gay, lesbian, transgender, questioning is way more acceptable than it was when your grandparents grew up. That will change what you think about politics. We know that. Even if you're against gay marriage or rights for gays or LGBT, that's irrelevant in the sense that your generation has grown up in a political culture that is very different. We are growing up in a culture where technology is much more important, things like that. So there are some influences that happen just as time goes on. Okay, demographic influences. So this is where we talk about what is your voting behavior? And I think this is fascinating. Okay, education. Individuals with a postgraduate education are increasingly democratic. We have seen that the more degrees you get, the more democratic you get. I think that's fascinating. I really want to study that. Voters with only a high school education tend to be Republican. Now, obviously there are outliers here, right? Like, obviously there are people who have PhDs and are very strongly Republican. And obviously there are people who have a high school diploma who are very Democratic. But in general, this is kind of what we're saying, in general, we see that the higher education you have, the more Democratic you have, the lower education you have, the more Republican you are. Influence of economic status. Your income is a strong predictor of whether you'll be a liberal or a conservative. Those with low incomes tend to favor government action to benefit the poor and promote economic equality. Obviously, right? This is kind of one of those common sense sort of things. If you don't have a lot of money, you are going to favor the idea of government helping you out. Therefore, we know that people who have a high economic status tend to favor the political agenda of less government giving less money out to people. We just know that we sort of get the sense of, well, I became successful, I can do it, those people can do it too. We shouldn't have the government helping them or possibly keeping them where they are. Religious influence, so denomination. The thing that your book really touches on, because there isn't a huge, like there isn't one denomination that is very clearly one party or another, but we do know that predominantly people who are of the Jewish religion are much more liberal. It's like the one denomination that most people who kind of practice the Jewish religion tend to be in a liberal leaning sense. Religious influence, religiosity, or evangelicals. So not what type of religion are you, but how religious are you? Are you a Catholic Easter or a Christmas Easter Catholic? Are you going every Sunday? Are you involved in a youth group? Okay, so we know that voters who are devout, voters who are often in church, regardless of their church affiliation, tend to vote Republican. We just know that the more religious you are, there is a tendency for conservative issues here. The only exception here is African Americans. They continue to be strongly supportive of Democrats, even if they're super religious. They just tend to be more Democratic. So that kind of moves into the influence of race and ethnicity. Your book says that although African Americans are on average somewhat conservative in certain cultural issues such as same-sex marriage and abortion, they tend to be more liberal than whites on social welfare matters, civil liberties, and foreign policy. So we see that African Americans tend to be sort of conservative in what we call domestic issues, things like same-sex marriage, abortion. They tend to not be in favor of those things, but they are in favor a lot of civil liberties, the rights that you're given, welfare, and then foreign policy. The fastest growing population in the country, this is really important, the Latino population. We actually don't have a tendency for the Latino population. They're a big group that's still up in the air, and that obviously you're going to see is going to be a huge market for the presidential candidates. We don't know historically where Latinos lie as far as their voting behavior. And so that means they're up for grabs. It means that they're going to try and make sure that they can appeal. It's why someone like Marco Rubio is a big deal, because the Republicans are hoping that he's appealing to these Latino voters and bringing them to their side. But it's also why, if you watched the Republican candidate debate last week, and they were talking about immigration, I don't remember who it was, but someone said the Democrats are high-fiving right now. Because the more that the Republicans fight over this immigration and they make illegal immigrants seem like these evil, terrible people, the more those Latinos are going to move to the Democratic side, because they don't want to be in a party that thinks that their heritage is not important. But it's going to be a huge swing part of the 2016 election for sure. Okay, the gender gap. Gender gap is a term you definitely need to know, and it's the difference between the percentage of women who vote for a particular candidate and the percentage of men who vote for a candidate. We call this the women's vote, or women's issues. These are things like family leave, maternity leave, things like abortion, reproductive rights. Those are all issues that can swing women to different sides of the aisle. Women are much more likely to oppose capital punishment. We just know that women tend to oppose the death penalty, and the use of force abroad. Women, after being polled, tend not to be in favor of sending troops across seas. They're more concerned about risks to the environment. They're more supportive of social welfare, and they are more amendable or flexible to extending civil rights to gays and lesbians. So we know that just in general, female gender tends to support some of those things. So what are some of the reasons for the gender gap? People have spent years, millions of dollars, trying to study why women and men differ in some areas and what some of those reasons are. And especially now, the fact that I am in a committed relationship and I disagree very greatly with my significant other is a very new concept. If we were dating in the 1950s, I would need to believe in what he believed in. It wouldn't be acceptable for me to challenge him on some of those political ideals. So some of the reasons for the gender gap is that in a tendency we see men and women not getting married as early. So they're independent, they're staying independent, they're keeping their own ideas. Because your generation will marry much later than your grandparents' generation, it means that your thoughts and ideas change. And that also means that you're not having children as early. When you have children, we know that your political socialization will change a little bit. You'll have different ideas, you'll have different concerns. There will be different issues that you will care more deeply about than you do right now. But if you're not having kids for another 10 years, that means that change isn't happening until later on in your life. And that's why we start to see that gender gap continue to widen, because you're not connecting to somebody else as early as you used to. And then lastly is geographic region. So we used to sort of kind of split the country. The South was a solid Democrat, started to move towards the Republican Party. Now we start to see southern states tend to gravitate towards the Republican Party. Northern states are typically in a Democratic leaning or a liberal leaning situation. But in general, this is not, it's not that cut and dry. I'm going to show you a picture here in just a second. There's a ton of variability that exists in political attitudes and party affiliation within a single state. Rather than seeing states as blue and red, essentially they're really just purple. Geographic region has really started to sort of ebb and flow a lot more than it used to. So before the bell rings, I'm going to just quickly show you this. This is a chart that is in your book, and it shows you that gender gap. Things that, like the graph on the left is showing you things that women tend to be less supportive of. and then men, and then men. And so this is a vote for Democratic presidential candidate. We saw that women tended to be a higher percentage of the vote, men tended to be lower. Republican men tend to be higher, women tended to be lower. And that gap, that little piece in the middle, that's studied. Why is there a difference? Why is the Republican Party appealing to more men than women? What do they need to change to say? Okay, we'll finish lecture tomorrow. Oops.